All right, so we are back here and we will present Dr. Charles Blake from Australia. And he will be talking about a subject is called waste management. And the title of his lecture is Waste to Sovereignty of Spirit. All right, here is Dr. Charles Blake.
Well, hello today. Welcome to the Universal Trust Life and Free Energy Conference. I just need to tell you that my name's Dr. Charles Blake and I'm doing this recording on the fly. I'm in Central Victoria, Australia, having just completed my 50th school reunion, which has been a very reflective moment and given me the opportunity to connect with a great deal of my old school friends, but also the opportunity to ponder the previous 50 years and what I've learned. I will be referring to my documents here because, as I say, I'm on the fly, and additionally, I'm making this recording from a public space. So if you can hear any other extraneous noises, please exercise for some forbearance in respect to that, because it is in fact a public space, and it is what is available to me at the moment. Now, I believe we've got 40 minutes, so we'd better get cracking. The first thing I should explain is something to do with my background. I grew up in Papua New Guinea. My family had been there for a very long time. This was the family home in the 20s. It was an establishment that was created with a great deal of hard work and served faithfully right up until the Second World War, when it was obliterated by the Japanese invasion of Rabaul. And this is an image of the kind of culture that I was exposed to as a child. This is a very important ceremony conducted in Rabaul, Eastern Britain, with these guys dressed up in leaves here, basically witch doctors, and they're welcoming in the witch doctors from the sea, and very important ceremony. Certain people are not allowed to see this ceremony. If they are, they are very severely dealt with, particularly the feminine gender, which is not a happy thing to have to say. But what I'm leading to is that in my life, I have had the opportunity to experience a very wide latitude of humanity. Papua New Guinea, which is the country in which I grew up, at that point had a population of around 3.5 million approximately, and within that 3.5 million there were over 800 languages. These very much creates a huge latitude of behavior and thinking. Additional to that was the presence of Chinese merchants and various religious communities established, Catholics, Presbyterians, Church of England, and so on and so forth. There were planter communities, people that planted plantations, and that's where my family roots are, cocoa and coconut plantations. And of course, living in such a place as that, was almost required that we take the opportunity to send children away for education overseas. So I went to boarding school for 8 years in Victoria. Can't quite figure out why my parents sent me so far south, but we'll leave that for further speculation down the track. Really, the subject I want to discuss today is got a lot to do with the condition that we find ourselves in today regarding humanity and the forces that are exerting such extraordinary influence on the way things are flowing at the moment in the world. And I think I would be safe to say that many of us have cause for concern, considerable concern in this respect. I have taken the opportunity to find a quote from John F. Kennedy, which was basically made in 1961. And I'll just read it out very briefly here. For we are opposed around the world to a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Well, that was rather a long time ago, 1961, and I think an awful lot has transpired at the hands of this agency. We probably don't need to dwell too much, but let us just discuss some more of the more poignant areas that affect us directly on a personal level on a daily basis. Our food has been highly corporatized in many respects, and I'm not speaking of everywhere, but certainly the Commonwealth nations such as Australia, Canada, the United States of America, whether they believe it or not, are still, in some people's minds, part of the British Commonwealth, believe it or not. And we are subjected to, without our choice, various degrees of diminution of information regarding alteration of food, genetic engineering, all sorts of dyes, hormones, and various constituents of food which have really no business to be there. We have agencies such as Codex Alimentarius, who is prescribing and normalizing and all appearing to be completely legitimate, but in fact are working in the background to diminish our health in many respects by way of slow starvation through insufficient nutrition. Our water, in many instances, has got chlorine and fluoride and various other things in it that are arguably carcinogenic, or even some would argue atrophy the pineal gland, causing complexities in respect to our ability to connect to the higher functions of our brain and spirit. Our waste is basically mismanaged, in my view, having spent some 27 years now as a waste management and environmental consultant mostly in Australia. So allow me to just apologize for the background noise, but as I did say, I am in a public place. So basically, this brings me to a sense of where we are in respect of conclusions. How do we actually deal with this? This is a huge monolithic undertaking, and designed primarily to disempower human beings and their communities, and that's from my point of view. One might argue otherwise, but I'm merely reflecting on the observations I've made in the last 50 years in the various things that I've engaged with, and they are extensive in that, you know, I've been involved in the artistic world, making sculpture for the Church of England in London, I became a sea captain in Papua New Guinea and operated for nearly 5 years as a sea captain. I engaged in salvage diving. I've created cocoa and coconut plantations and forestry operations. I came to Australia. I engaged again in farming here, and I noted particularly the use and prevalence of use of pesticides and various fungicides and so on and so forth. I then went back to sea, and it was actually whilst I was the captain of a hovercraft that I gained the opportunity to sit comfortably as commander of the hovercraft. But in those days, before terrorism and all the rest of the brouhaha that's been inflicted upon us, it was generally acceptable to have anybody who felt that they deserved to come and sit in the captain's cockpit. And because we had Expo 88 in Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, in 1988, of course, that was the reason the hovercraft were deployed, and these crafts carried 70 people in luxury, and people would come into the cockpit, and we would be given the opportunity to communicate for at least in the order of 2 hours whilst we were making our way from the Gold Coast, Marina Mirage, which was where we set off from, to the middle reaches of the Brisbane River where Expo was being conducted. And so I had the opportunity, which was very precious actually, to speak to captains of industry, to high-level bureaucrats, to politicians, and all sorts of different people. And from somebody who came from operating an island plantation situation, who was used to taking responsibility for energy, for waste management, for food supply, for the agricultural requirements, for the maintenance of the vehicles, for navigation of ships, pretty much everything, to come to a country and be exposed to the perspective of all of this stream of humanity through my cockpit, basically made it very clear to me that certainly in Australia, there was no one at the helm of the ship of state, and that was a real concern. And I looked around and reviewed the leadership that I had seen and been taught about in school, and I started to become conscious that all of the things that had been very clear when I was being taught in my boarding school, the pillars of democracy, had all been disempowered progressively and one step at a time, and to the point where we now do not operate as a sovereign country. We operate as a registered corporation in a foreign precinct, and the people are no longer citizens or the sovereign entity. Certainly in the Commonwealth, we are now the goods and chattels of corporations. This is not a happy outcome, certainly from my perspective, and so I have, as a result, chosen to try to do something about it. I made that decision while I was piloting a hovercraft. The trouble is, I didn't know what to do. I just knew somebody had to do something. And so when the Expo 88 was finished and the hovercraft were being wound up due to the financial constraints of the owners, I got drawn into the environmental arena. I was involved in oil water separation because of my participation in oil spill recovery as a marine officer. And so that sort of dragged me into consulting to petroleum refineries on that subject of oil water separation and the more complex areas of soluble hydrocarbons and remediation. And that drew me into dealing with pesticides such as DDT and dieldrin, which we used microbes to process. And over the period of time, I've gained a considerable insight into waste management technologies. I didn't realize for a long time how imperative this was to be in terms of forming up a solution to the recovery of our position as sovereign human beings. So this, in a sense, is the subject matter about which we're going to go to in some level of depth, not too deep, but just to draw your attention to the fact that we live in a world of induced scarcity, because scarcity is the oxygen of corporation and the bankers. If we were all able to produce our own food and water and shelter and transportation and communication, we would be sufficiently wealthy to engage in our education. And that is the central point around which I'm having this discourse today. So, how do we deal with this? If we had the infrastructure to take all of the stuff that we throw away, we would be able to accrue the value of that in a way that would have potentially communities become sovereign. And so I'm just going to do a bit of a split screen here and show you a diagram of what I'm calling a mass and energy flow sheet, and then we'll talk about mass and energy balances. So for those of you who have a technophobia about that sort of thing, please bear with me. It's not that complicated, and it really is the way that we should be viewing everything that we deal with in our world. We now operate with the term economics, which refers specifically to money, but money isn't the value itself. Money is most definitely a negotiable instrument that represents the value that we as human beings create. And we mustn't forget that. And we must remember that all of the things that we create, like corporations and banks and so on and so forth, started their lives as tools for the benefit of humanity. They have become the instrument of our suppression. So we need some re-examination and some rebooting as to where we get our value and how we do that. So let's have a look at this scenario. On this chart here, you'll see that we start off with the base energy and mass in the form of sunlight, water, carbon, minerals and metals, and energy in the form of wind, photovoltaics, solar thermal, electromagnetic, fossil and fissile, being nuclear. And we use all of this stuff, this mass and this energy, in the extraction process from agriculture, forestry, fisheries, mining, etc., and the extraction of energy in the form of fossil and fissile fuels. We call that primary industry. That goes on to manufacturing, value adding, and so on and so forth. And all this is quite right and quite normal, we would think. Transport and distribution. And at some point, it ends up that it's designated to be waste, at which point it either ends up in a sewage treatment plant, if you're in Europe or the developed world, otherwise not, should we say. And if it's municipal waste or industrial waste, it ends up in a tip site somewhere, which may end up in a landfill. And yes, we do engage in some degree of limited segregation and recycling, but it is not by no means the absolute manner of level of purity that we certainly are able to achieve. So this constitutes a hemorrhage of mass and energy in industrial society, which ultimately means we have peak oil, we have peak minerals, we have peak metals, we have peak everything else. Well, peak is optional. We can keep throwing things away and devaluing them to the point where they're beyond reclamation. But if we take waste, generally speaking, the resources in waste are vastly more refined already than they were when we looked at them in terms of raw materials in the primary industry and refinement process. So what I'm going to suggest is that if we follow the yellow brick road here, and we come to the possibility of using all of our waste streams, our organic greenwood waste, forestry thinnings, agricultural waste, municipal solid waste, tires, waste oil, plastics, in fact, anything that is carbon-based, then we engage in a gasification process. So probably I should go a bit slower. This is a multi-stage process for separating the gaseous components from the more solid elements which occur in ash. So assuming we gasify our waste streams, we recover that gas and we clean it up and put it through various processes. We have many different pathways to achieve this. I'm not being at all prescriptive in respect to which technology to use, because there are a number of technological pathways to achieve exactly this, and they vary in their efficacy and applicability according to the requirements of each community. But here's what it delivers: liquid fuels. That leads on to fuel autonomy and economic resilience at a local level. It also provides certainty in respect to transportation and distribution. Part of the byproduct of all of this is water, clean water, carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, remember, is not to be vilified. It is actually carbon that is the central molecule or central atom in the matrix of life. This is something we mustn't forget. Carbon dioxide can be split into oxygen and carbon nanoparticulates, which have a phenomenal propensity to be used as ultra pure materials in a whole new generation of material technologies, such as graphene, carbon nanotubes, and so on and so forth. Do please excuse the background noise. Now, very importantly, ash remains, and what remains in the ash is a function of what went in the front end. But generally speaking, a large volume of the ash is going to be taken up by aluminium silicate. This can be split into aluminium metal and pure silicon. Pure silicon then can be applied in many areas of electronics, including photovoltaics. But we don't leave it there. We further refine so that we recover base metals, rare earths, and the precious metals. So this is pretty important stuff. This is pretty important stuff, because basically what I'm saying here is if we own the right infrastructure at a community level through the mechanism of collective ownership, some form of collective ownership such as Mondragon or a standard communally owned arrangement, essentially the assets that accrue from us recycling I mean really recycling our economy, accrues to us as a community. And the reason this is really important is that we have progressively relinquished in our history the role of education to either the church or the state. And be assured that nobody contributes such continuously large levels of resourcing unless there was something in it for them. Now, that's the problem. As human beings, we've relinquished the responsibility for education to the state and to the church. And what that has enabled to happen is a progressive stream of misinformation and lies, propaganda, etc., that has accrued to our disempowerment and to the centralization of all of the things that we've just been talking about: food manufacture, energy, transportation, and so on, to very large corporate and industrial and political entities. So communities, and most importantly mums and dads, who appear to me from observation to be the only people that have the ethical imperative to have a future for their children. Because I don't see the drivers behind politics being the well-being of the future generations. The driver there is to get re-elected, and whilst you're in power, make sure that you come out with as many connections and as full of pockets as you can. Don't mean to be cynical, but my observations are pretty true, I would suspect, and I think you may agree. Additionally, corporations are not driven by the well-being of the ecosystem or the well-being of humanity. They are driven by the accrual of larger profits to their bottom line. And that particular artifact of humanity, the corporation, has conscripted amongst the most intelligent and powerful people on the planet to deliver a profit. But, you know, we've rather lost track of the truth that it's not the money that's of value. Money's the negotiable instrument conveying the value. It's like mistaking the territory for the map. Everyone's obsessed with the map. The map is just paper. So is the money. It's just paper. And it doesn't even need to be paper. I mean, even if it's gold, it's still just gold. The value is clean water, clean air, arable land, you know, functional, warm housing, transportation and communication, and above all, profoundly deliberate and supportive education, which leads people to recognize that the biggest lie of all is the lie of separation. Separation from each other, separation from nature, and probably more importantly, and I hesitate to say, separation from our source. And that, I think, is the biggest problem that we face, that we now feel individual, alone, incapable of making a difference. But I'm here to suggest otherwise. There is this pathway, and if we as communities band together, it is true that we can organize the appropriate suite of infrastructure to enable each community to generate its own energy through a number of different approaches, sufficient to maintain a high standard of living. And there is, and I digress just for a minute, there is a correlation between ubiquitous availability of energy and the human birth rate. Wherever we have access to energy, and where we don't need to have scads of human beings to pump water and to plow fields and to do this, that, and the other thing, then essentially we have a decline in the birth rate. We see this in countries like Japan, certainly in the OECD countries, Australia. If we were not importing people, we would probably have a negative growth rate. Canada's probably the same with the United States and Europe. I think all the European nations have static, if not shrinking, population, and it's being replaced by others. We won't go beyond that, but at this point, it is certainly of concern. So the business of providing energy is a pathway to the management of our reproductive rate on this planet. And just to make a point, when I was at art school, or even when I was here at Timbertop in 1966, the population of the world was just a little bit less than half of what it is today. In one lifetime, in the space of 50 years, the population on planet Earth has doubled. So we have enormous tasks ahead of us. And it's immensely important that we engage vigorously, in my view, with getting to grips with owning our own community assets, because this is a pathway to the achievement of abundance. Abundance enables us to make sensible choices about how we deploy the resources that we have at hand. And what I'm leading to is that education is probably the most important of those resources. The children of the future, the young people of today, are faced with a phenomenal task ahead of them to rehabilitate the ecosystem of this planet. We currently have hemorrhaging radioactive waste in the North Pacific. We are witnessing ecological freefall occurring on the coast of the United States all the way far south into South America, Peru, and working its way across the Pacific. It's really only a matter of time. I'm confident that we do have the technologies to deal with this. And I'm also confident that we have the assistance and help from all sorts of guides on planet Earth and possibly even off planet Earth to enable us to engage with this task. But so far, this travesty has been occurring for 5 years and no one has been able to get close enough to its source to actually do anything to stem the flow. And as an environmental engineer, I can assure you that there is plenty we can do with everyday technologies to stem the flow of the contamination there. I do not believe that this has been done. I am staggered by the forces that have managed to make sure that this has not been taken on. It certainly wasn't the response when Chernobyl occurred. There was a huge effort to manage that. I don't see a similar effort at Fukushima. So that's just one thing. We have damage to the atmosphere through chemtrails. We have damage to water and soil through chemtrails. We have damage to the genome through genetic engineering. We have damage to the water of the oceans and the inland waterways through all manner of pesticides, fungicides, hormones, God only knows whatever else. So what I'm saying is that by putting this small suite of technology in, we can effectively make use of all of this loss of energy and mass into the environment back to an accrual of value, which enables us to operate as no longer totally embedded in industrial revolution type mass production and centralization, but to return to some level of cottage industry, which enables us to make community-based decisions on how it is that we spend the resources that accrue to us. Be assured, there is no shortage of energy in the universe. This is an abundant universe. And given that energy is a form of mass, there's no short of mass either, should we choose to make use of it. So education, connection to source, connection to each other through telepathy, through to other species, through species communication, to other locations through remote viewing. These are very important subjects that I think need to be embraced by any education system that we engage with. Not to mention the extraordinary work that's been done in recent times by very clever people like Tanya Moore and Kaspar, who's done some amazing work in the area of education, and Dr. Grigory Lozanov from Bulgaria, and very numerous others who have put together technologies that do not require young people to be incarcerated in classrooms for 12 years to come out with no expectation and no knowledge of the real world. Nature is the primary source of education, and that's where kids need to be, out in the field, helping their parents in industry, in homes, on farms, in food production, in water management, and so on and so forth. These are the kinds of education we require. Now, startling to note that I've been talking for nearly 40 minutes now. I'm just going to have a quick review of my notes to see, because I do apologize for the lack of structure in all of this, but I think we've probably pretty much covered most everything. And I understand that the mechanism here is that after this little discourse, there will be an opportunity to speak to you directly to answer any questions. And I look forward to doing that should any questions arise. Thank you so much for your time and perseverance in listening to my ramblings today. And I look forward to speaking with you directly. Cheers from now. Hello.
Hello, it's Charles. Can you hear me?
Hello, Caspar.
Okay, very good. So there we are. Finally, we got a connection.
Yes.
That's good. So we just listened to your 40 minutes speech, and we're all interested in, it was very great to hear you there, your background story and the whole development. So I will offer an opportunity to the people here to ask questions. So anybody who has particular questions for Charles?
Grab a mic.
Okay, just a second. Question.
Yes.
Here comes the question. Let's see.
Okay.
Hi, Charles. Question. Do we have enough technology to recycle everything?
Hi. I believe we do. I believe we have some choices.
Good. So I am just about to read out the answer you put on the Skype message window. Let me just read it out. We can make an assessment. So the question was, how much would a general recycling solution cost, let's say, for a community of 5,000 people. I wrote 500 by mistake. We can make an assessment only on the basis of the volume, characterization, and moisture content of the waste. With this information, we can prepare a pre-feasibility budget figure and list of equipment. All right, does that answer your question, Claudia?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, she says. All right, any other questions? Anything you would like to add to what you already said and which you consider perhaps important to add to what you already said?
Yes. What I can say is that should anybody or any community wish to engage in further conversation about setting up a project, the first thing they would need to do is just to find out how much waste, and in fact that includes every kind of waste, from so long as it's carbon-based. That can include sewage. It can include tires. It can include plastic. It can include pretty much anything that's carbon-based. If you can get that, the volume and any seasonal variations in volume or moisture content, if you can get all of that to me, I can get back to you with a figure, or at least an idea of what it'll cost and how long it might take. And we may also, if the proponents of the project are able to have prepared an offtake agreement for the products, then that will help us arrange funding for a project on a build, own, operate, transfer basis. So basically that means the community may not need to put up any capital, but over a period of time would end up owning all of that infrastructure.
I get it. Okay. Would you have something like a questionnaire which could be given to community leaders to answer all those questions?
Absolutely. We have a questionnaire which I'll make available to you. I can send that to you, Caspar, and if you'd like to make that available to anybody that may be interested, I'd be very happy to respond to those.
Yes, I would appreciate that, yeah. You can send that later. That's not right now, but thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. This lady from Vienna? Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions for Charles? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Charles. This was a great contribution, and wish you a very nice rest of the night or evening.
Well, thank you, Caspar. Just one other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is that if communities require energy, please don't think that the volume of waste has got anything to do with the amount of energy that we can provide, if you understand what I'm saying.
You mean
So,
it's not one-on-one?
So there are technologies that are available to us now that will enable us to provide electricity sufficient to meet the requirements of any community, irrespective of the volume of waste that they generate.
Oh, I got it, yeah. Great, thank you. All right.
Very good. Okay.
I think
well,
that's,
thank you, folks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's give him a hand. You hear that?
Oh, very good. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Charles, and bye for now.
Cheers for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.